This video is brought to you by my new book, Genesis Saga: A Call to Aid. If you're craving a science fantasy adventure that's more in the spirit of Star Wars before Disney ruined it, then feel free to check out the links in the description. It's available in both ebook and paperback. Humble Bundle is a great service. You get your hands on a bulk bundle of anything from PC games to ebooks to software, 3D printing files, media assets, and a whole lot more, while also supporting some charity on the side at the same time. What's not to love about that? You get to feel good about helping the less fortunate and feel good about enjoying more than $100 worth of entertainment for next to nothing. Of course though, this does mean you run the very real risk of inflating your backlog to astronomical proportions. Something I am somewhat ashamed to admit I'm guilty of. So please join me as I get on my hands and knees, roll up my sleeves and get my hands into the muck and the grime of my Steam library in pursuit of some hidden diamonds I've thrown into it. Starting off with a retro shooter that rode the coattails of Doom 2016, Hellbound. Now that's not a dig against this game. Hellbound by Cybot Studios is a boomer shooter through and through without any of the bells and whistles of the 2016 Doom. It just raises an eyebrow at how it marketed itself as a 90s shooter 30 years later and featured a premise identical to Doom's. But that doesn't mean Hellbound doesn't stand on its own feet. In fact, if this came out back in the day when Quake was the cutting edge standard, this would have easily been called the first true 3D Doom before Doom 3. As I said, this is an old school boomer shooter through and through. There's no skill progression, there's no loot system, there's no inventory system, but good old running and gunning action, and you know what? That's fine. There is one modern innovation though, and that's the inclusion of alternate attacks for certain weapons, like iron sight aiming for a certain weapon or attacks that turn them into two guns in one. The gameplay is fun, and what it does set out to do, it does so without issue. It's not like, say, Alien Rage, where it claims to be old school, but only lets you hold two weapons at any time. It does help that the game has a bitchin' soundtrack that does get you in the mood for splattering demon guts, and the sound design on the guns really gives the weapons some solid oomph, with the triple shotgun in particular sounding like when God lets loose a fart. That alongside watching a charging demon explode like a water bomb full of tomato soup, with chicken bones and offal flying around, that gun in particular just never gets old to use.
Triple shotgun.
However, one thing that struck me right off the bat was the game's visual fidelity. I'm not going to say I was expecting something on the level of Crysis, but the graphics weren't the best and really do show that this game was made on a tight budget. What's more is that the world of the game feels less like a demon-infested hellscape and more like a He-Man and the Masters of the Universe playset. See, the overall art direction for Hellbound can be easily described as toyetic, with character models being large and chunky or long and lanky, with bright colours running around environments that, as I said, look like they're right out of Masters of the Universe, so it detracts from the action horror feel that the developers were going for. However, that doesn't mean that the colour coordination doesn't work. See, the brighter colours are often reserved for the weapons and armour of the enemies, so they contrast against the predominantly more maroon and red environments. This means at a glance you can instinctively know what gun to use in what situation, what pickups are what, and where explosives are located in the level. So while it's not overall the prettiest of the boomer shooters, it still does know how to rock what it's got. But a budget does not excuse how badly this game ran on my rig. I'm not going to say my PC is a beast of a machine. Its graphics card is an Nvidia GTX 1060, and it just barely meets the minimum system requirements for Elden Ring, yet it can still run that game smoothly. Here though, Hellbound suffered from regular frame rate drops and hiccups while playing, and there is no reason why this should be the case. There's nothing worse than getting into a 1v80 kill fest, getting into a good groove, slaughtering the minions of hell like you're a Roomba of heaven, then out of nowhere the frame rate drops from 60 to 10, and then it freezes up, and upon resuming, you're dead. However, despite that issue, that is not my biggest complaint with the game. My biggest complaint is that it's too short! At the time of writing, I'd clocked in a total of 4 hours, and that's after completing the campaign and replaying some of the earlier levels on a harder difficulty for this video. This sucks for two main reasons. The first is that the game does its own version of the location map from Doom, so it creates this impression that the game has multiple episodes like its inspiration. But nope. What you see is what you get. The other reason is that the game is so much fun that I'm just disappointed that there isn't more of it. Then again, that perhaps is for the best. It's better to be short and sweet rather than long and drawn out. So if you're looking for a fun, old school experience that won't take up too much of your time, Hellbound is well worth checking out, but do be warned, you will be wishing there was more. Now we move on to the next game in the Humble Bundle Showcase, Scarlet Nexus.
Die, you son of a bitch!
Now, Scarlet Nexus is something that has been on my radar for some time due to one reason. I thought it was a Souls-like, and I love those games. The reason why was because I saw some footage of gameplay on the Steam page and noticed that it seemed somewhat similar to another title released by Bandai Namco, Code Vein, but once I tried it out, I realized that my assumptions more than missed the mark. What I got was something that was balls of stylish fun that had me keep coming back for more, except for when work kept pulling me away and leaving me too exhausted to play. So suffice to say, I was not able to put in the full hours I wanted for this title, but that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy what time I could with it. Easily Scarlet Nexus's best aspect is the gameplay. This is a hack and slash RPG where fun, fluidity, and style are the name of the game here. The core of it is throwing out simple combos and dodging enemy attacks, with the combo chains increasing as you unlock new attacks and upgrades. What helps set it apart from the rest of the pack though are the protagonists. They have psychokinesis and can throw objects in the environment around. There's also some strategic elements as well with staggering and finishes, where you wear down an enemy's defense until they're vulnerable, then you can take them out with a stylish finisher for extra rewards. It all clicks together seamlessly into what can be described as the love child of Devil May Cry and Persona. Damn. Outside of the hack and slash missions, there are these social interlude chapters. Here, you're free to decompress, interact with the other characters, and improve your friendship bonds with them. This is where the Persona influences come in. It's not a full social life sim, there's no weekly calendar and schedule to follow. You're free to take your time to get closer with the other characters so they're more effective in combat, or revisit areas for grinding and doing side missions. This is nice and does work with the unlocking of new attacks to stop the combat from getting stale. It's also a necessity in order to get to see more of the game's admittedly interesting world. This is a world of augmented reality where technology taps into the full potential of the human brain, where an apocalypse occurred requiring the need for a military force to ensure the security of the populace, and another for exclusively dealing with the monsters spawned by the apocalypse, the Others.
There must be a weak spot.
Which reminds me, the game does a terrible job at explaining its world. That isn't to say it's a Final Fantasy XIII situation. You can get what's what from the get-go, but in the time I was able to play, the broad strokes of the lore remained unexplained. Perhaps things like the Extinction Belt or what the Others are exactly are explained later, or in the campaign I wasn't able to touch on. Which is a shame because the game's setting is unique enough that you want to see and know more. The Others, they're so abstract and bizarre in their appearance and variety that they can't help but beckon further curiosity. Curiosity that alongside its dual campaign means that the game requires 2 playthroughs. Which reminds me, I should have mentioned this sooner, but Scarlet Nexus has something in common with Resident Evil 2. 2 protagonists with their own narrative beats and perspectives on the intersecting events of the narrative. As I said earlier, I wasn't able to play both campaign scenarios, but the intrigue for the wider world and the fun of the gameplay give this title a great deal of replayability and plenty of bang for your buck.
Keep this up. All right. Focus. All right.
The only other thing I have to say about Scarlet Nexus is that its larger areas are barren and they feel dead. This isn't an open world game. Its areas are all linear paths with some alternate routes. Some of them though are more open than others, letting you see further off into the distance, where there's nothing. Nothing waiting for you but enemies that spawn in out of thin air as you get close. This is a nitpick, but it's one that makes the world feel less alive than it should. Besides, this isn't a graphics-intensive game. Cel-shaded graphics have always been easier on hardware than photorealistic art directions, so there's no reason for the sake of immersion some enemies couldn't be rendered low poly for the sake of maintaining immersion. I know this is a petty criticism, but it just stuck out to me so much that I felt like I had to bring it up. What's more is that if this is one of my core criticisms, then I'd say it speaks volumes about the game's overall quality. Now on to the next game in our showcase, Greak.
I need your help.
Now, Greak Memories of Azure is a puzzle platformer of the Metroidvania variety, where you control 3 protagonists. If you're someone who's been somewhat plugged into the indie scene, then that would bring up fond memories of a game called Trine, and you would be forgiven for making that comparison because, while it can be assumed Greak took some inspiration from that, it's really its own beast. The world of Azure, for instance, is beautiful, and it's brought to life with hand-drawn animation. Everything from verdant forests to ancient temples, dark caves, and blazing forges are nice to look at. Not just because the art direction is good or because the animation is fluid, but because the presentation, on top of all of that, is top-notch. As you progress, areas will actually start to change in small but noticeable ways. Characters will do different things. Day will turn to night, the weather will change, throw in enemies scurrying about the foreground of the screen in some areas, and it makes Azure feel like a living world. One pulled from the classical era movies of Studio Ghibli that you'll just want to explore every inch of it that you can. The music complements the presentation greatly. It's an orchestral score that drives home the sense of wonder and adventure the characters experience as they explore the world around them. I won't say any song in particular stuck out to me while playing, like with Bound by Flame or Dusk, but I couldn't see myself enjoying the game as much as I did without it. Hell, I'd even go so far as to say it's one of the few soundtracks I'm considering buying entirely on its own. Now, as for the gameplay, as I said earlier, this is a platformer of the Metroidvania variety. You explore, gain new abilities, revisit old areas, and unlock shortcuts to more easily access an interconnected world. However, what sets it apart is that you're not just controlling one character named Greak. Instead, you control him and his 2 siblings, Adara and Raydell. Each of them have their own abilities, stats, and inventories. Greak is an all-rounder, Adara uses magic bolts and can hover like Princess Peach, and Raydell is the tank. He can block attacks, use a grappling hook, and is the only one who can't swim. Each of them is fun to use and experiment with as you get to grips with their abilities and how they go up against different enemies and hazards. But as I said earlier, you'd be forgiven for drawing comparisons to the Trine games for one important reason. See, in Trine, you swapped out one of 3 characters out at a time to solve puzzles. Here, that's not the case. You're controlling all 3 characters at once. Now, this isn't entirely a bad thing. The characters you're not immediately controlling can defend themselves in a basic sense, and you can leave characters in one part of the world while exploring with the one you want to control. Problems arise when you have a free character with you. You always have to keep them in mind outside of puzzles because, while they can defend themselves, their AI is not the best, and it's only a matter of time until even the most basic of enemies get enough good hits in and kill them, causing a game over. This is made worse with the boss fights, as some of them require more than one character to fight. These fights are doable, they're just cumbersome experiences, as you have to juggle between 2 or 3 characters on the fly in order to make use of the right combination of abilities in order to bring the bosses down. The only other thing I have to say about Greak is that there's no co-op for it at all. There's 3 playable leads that are controllable at any time, yet there's no co-op, local or split screen to speak of. Again, this is a nitpick and it doesn't hurt the game, but the obvious potential of this with co-op is so, well, for lack of a better word, obvious. It just leaves me baffled that the developers didn't think to include it. These issues aside, I enjoyed the time I was able to put into Greak, and I do hope that we get to see another adventure set in the world of Azure in the future. Now it's time for the last game in our little showcase, Crying Suns. Now, Crying Suns is a roguelite strategy game that maintains a healthy balance of resource-driven strategy and random story-driven adventure. We play the role of a nobleman belonging to an interstellar empire awakening to a shattered world, forced to explore the ruins amongst the stars, piece together what happened, and restore what once was. It's a solid setup with not only the narrative, but the gameplay to match. As soon as I started to play it, immediately it reminded me of Subset Games' FTL, with how you have to manage fuel to travel from star system to star system and its use of turn-based combat. But that is where the similarities between the two end. While FTL was focused exclusively on ship-to-ship encounters, Crying Suns is Fleet v Fleet, where you navigate spawning ship companies across a hexagon-based grid, where your flagship acts as a spawning point as well as a source of special attacks. It feels like an alternate version of chess, where it's simultaneously simpler, yet more complex once you know how to actually play these segments. But that's not all, there's also planet-side missions and story segments. The planet-side missions are tense games of rock, paper, scissors, and chance. You know what major events lie in wait, but you don't know where they are or what lies between them. The only influence over these are what specialists you can choose to lead the missions, as each one will have different success rates that impact just what kind of success or failure the mission can be. I loved these, and every time I did one of them, I was excited, as each one never failed to be a source of nail-biting tension, as I watched the commandos in the squad I sent get injured or possibly die, and saw that, unfortunately, the specialist I chose wasn't able to complete the primary objective, but still came back with enough resources to make it worthwhile regardless. The story segments are great too. This isn't a narrative-driven game, yet it still does a great job at handling its story. We get a spoonful of narrative every time we enter a new star system alongside set major narrative points. Both of these paint a truly interesting universe, one where humanity not only reached the stars, but also built physics-defying computers that border on being gods, where our empire stretched across the galaxy before collapsing, leaving behind a desperate population fighting over scrap and the most precious fuel in the universe. It also takes liberal inspiration from Dune. Hell, our character is named Admiral Idaho, but honestly, it doesn't rip off Herbert's books. You can just tell what was clearly inspired, one way or another, from one of my favourite novels. So if you're a fan of the Dune books, you're in for a real treat whenever the story rears its head. The only real complaint I have about Crying Suns is that it's something that's integral to roguelites. You're at the mercy of RNG. Random numbers that can set you up to get your face slammed into the mud or give you an easy ride before bitch slapping you upside the head. And this applies regardless of difficulty. Hell, I actually spent the bulk of my time with the game on easy just so I could see as much as I could for this video. However, like I said, this is something integral to roguelites, and I did try it on normal and it was considerably more challenging, but also a lot less forgiving. But this randomness is also a source of both fun and challenge, regardless of whether or not it can get on your nerves, and to be honest, I actually did have fun in equal measures both on normal and on easy. I just wanted to see more of it with the easy mode. Considering that this is my only criticism of the game, I would say that that speaks volumes about this title's quality. Oh man, it's nice to finally have this done. Sorry about this being late, a bunch of other projects kept eating up my time, and well, I couldn't really put the time I wanted to into getting this done in a more timely manner, but hey, better late than never. For the next game review, I'm planning on taking a look at the new DreadX collection, DreadX 5. That's really piqued my curiosity, and I hope it comes out sooner rather than later, given the last minute delay on that. And some good news, I'm gonna have a movie review at long friggin' last out for you guys to enjoy in the coming days. It's going to be one taking a look at a movie that I loved back in the day called Undead. We got all that more coming up, so please stick around.